The member from Nepean Carleton.
Conversation. To the acting Premier. Today, the OPP claimed that they don't know exactly when 20 of the 24 computers were illegally accessed by Peter Face. How can you stand in this Assembly and say definitively that no computers were accessed after February 11th, when the OPP stated today they could have been accessed up until March 20th? Can you tell me exactly what you know that the OPP doesn't?
Thank you. Acting Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think members of the legislature are aware that an officer with the Ontario Provincial Police appeared in front of the Justice Committee this morning, and Mr. Speaker, he had two messages for that committee. The first is that the investigation is centred on the former Chief of Staff to Premier McGuinty, and that in fact it had nothing to do with the current Premier. In fact, I invite members to go on the Globe and Mail website. They may enjoy the headline of the article that's up about that appearance, and I quote, "No evidence Wynne oversaw document purge," OPP says. The second thing, Mr. Speaker, and this is just as important that the OPP conveyed to the committee, is that politicians should stay out of OPP investigations. Politicians have no business in OPP investigations, and that a politician getting involved in an OPP investigation may in fact put that investigation in jeopardy. And Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member should follow the advice of the Ontario Provincial Police.
Supplementary.
I would suggest that the Honourable Minister actually check the transcripts. I actually sat through committee, and here's what else he said. He said those computers could have been accessed up until March 20th.
Minister of Immigration
he said that the Premier's transition from Mr. McGuinty to Ms. Wynne happened almost immediately. He said that people that were staffing the transition between Kathleen Wynne and Dalton McGuinty happened almost on a daily basis. He also said he enjoyed appearing before our committee. So I'm going to ask you again, what could you possibly know about the access of these computers that the OPP doesn't know? How can you stand here in the legislature and say without a shadow of a doubt that no computers were wiped under the watch of the Wynne administration? Are you now taking a book out of Laura Miller's page and calling the OPP liars?
Stop. You see that, please? I know that this is a certain time in our history where things get heated. I'm going to offer caution to all members. There is my concern about parliamentary language, and let's just make sure we don't go there. The acting Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm quite happy to quote from Officer Duval of the Ontario Provincial Police, who appeared in front of the committee. Let me give one exchange he had with the member from Toronto Danforth. Here's the quote. "I can tell you that based on the information to obtain that I produced, it's centered on the action of Mr. David Livingston only." I'd also like to share with the honourable members what the officer had to say as well. I've been an officer for 17 years. It is an unusual request for a detective or an investigator to testify on the evidence that's been uncovered, as we are doing during this investigation. Is very unusual. But please understand that if you require me to answer questions on specific evidence, I could potentially threaten the prosecution on any criminal offences that may resolve from this investigation. There is a significant public interest in preserving the integrity of a criminal investigation.
Order, please.
I know, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable member likes staying up late watching Ellery Queen on television, but let's leave this to the Ontario Provincial Police.
Final supplementary.
Thanks. I actually have a Netflix program for the minister to watch, Orange is the New Black. I hope you look good in orange. But I'd like to say this to the minister. What also the OPP Detective Constable said to the Assembly is while David Livingston is right now the person of interest, they could potentially expand their search warrants as well as potential ITOs. That means you're not out of the clear yet, my friend. So I have a question for the acting Premier. If they're so concerned...
The Minister of Education will come to order. The Minister of Rural Affairs will come to order. And it's a little late, but the Minister from the Environment will come to order.
Why didn't the government launch an internal investigation into the destruction of documents or the alleged destruction of documents after the Information and Privacy Commissioner Ann Cavoukian stated in her report in June 2013 that that had happened? Were you afraid of what the results might be because you knew Peter Faist was still on the payroll with the Liberal Party?
Thank you. Acting Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I would remind the member when the Information and Privacy Commissioner report came out that we responded almost immediately to all her non-legislative recommendations. Action was taken to put in place the proper regime for record keeping, and I would also point her to a piece of legislation which has been introduced in this legislature which responds to some of the legislative recommendations of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. This Premier, Mr. Speaker,
from Simcoe North, come to order.
Wynne has taken this her obligation very, very seriously, and we have seen significant activity over the past year to make sure that documents are properly maintained by this government.
Thank you. New question.
To the acting premier, it's very clear that the premier did not take her job seriously. She pretends she wasn't Premier of Ontario for 6 weeks between February and March of last year. I ask again, on March 19th, your Deputy Director of Human Resources, Emily Marangoni, advised the Manager of Information Technology to remove the special administrative rights used by Peter Faist. How did Emily Marangoni know to have this access removed on March 19th, and why did she do so on March 19th? Answer the question.
Acting Premier.
Mr. Speaker, let's go back to this morning. We had an officer of the Ontario Provincial Police appear in front of the committee. He himself admitted this is an extraordinary situation in which he outlined two things. First of all, that the investigation involves Mr. David Livingston. There are allegations which are not proven. This is a very serious matter. And the time in which Premier McGuinty was in office. The second thing that he stressed, Mr. Speaker, is that it is not for members of Parliament, it is not for elected politicians to try to play amateur detective here. Let us allow the Ontario Provincial Police to undertake their work. They will reach whatever conclusions they reach, Mr. Speaker, and then we will be in a position to respond.
Thank you. Supplementary.
If the acting premier wants to talk about amateur hour, he should read the ITO reference to his government and their previous premier and what bureaucrats said about their government. But anyway, I will go back to this. What we know is that the OPP could charge further individuals. We do know computers could have been accessed up until March 20th. We do know that the premier's transition team took place almost immediately, and it confirmed that when Kathleen Wynne won the leadership on January 26th, she took access of that office almost immediately. When was the first time that the Premier, the Minister of Government Services, who's also the House Leader, and the Deputy Premier met with David Livingston or any member of her transition team to discuss the deleted emails and the gas plant scandal? Let us know, please.
Thank you. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Deputy Acting Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, I will go to Officer Duval of the Ontario Provincial Police. Quote his words, "I can tell you that based on the information to obtain that I produced, it centered," obviously means the investigation, "on the action of Mr. David Livingston only." And in fact, the member from Toronto, Danforth, goes on and says, have more warrants been executed than this? And the officer says, no. You know, Mr. Speaker, you're not getting anywhere across the way with this. Let me share, again, let me remind members what some of the media are saying about this dog and pony show. Globe and Mail, April 1st, the Conservative leader's aggressive attempts to score points without the facts to back them up are reminding Ontario voters why they haven't warmed up to them. The Toronto Star, April 1st, the leader of the opposition went far beyond what the facts show. Toronto Star, April 1st, every time the leader of the... I can go on.
No, you can't. Final supplementary.
Speaker, the reality here is that this is a government that is not telling the true story to the people of this province. They're not telling the whole story to the people of this province. It is very clear from the government's from the OPP's ITO. We know, for example, these computers could have been accessed up until March 20th. We know that the transition took place very quickly between the two former Premier and the current Premier. We know, for example, that many members of that former Premier's staff are still working with this government, including in that minister's office. Now let's talk about David Nicol. You threw him under the bus yesterday. When's Kathleen Wynne going to send you out of town too?
Stop the clock, please. Be seated. Be seated, please. I'm going to the Minister of Energy. I'm trying to address. As I warned earlier, this is getting desperately close. That was too close for my comfort, and I'll ask the member to refrain, and all members to refrain from making any references whatsoever to truth-telling. Carry on.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a very patient individual. I'll quote Officer Duval once again. In an exchange with the member from Toronto, Danforth, about the investigation, he said, and I quote, "I can tell you that based on the information to obtain that I produced, it centered," meaning the investigation, "on the action of Mr. David Livingston only." But let me go back to my quotes. And Mr. Speaker, I never thought I'd do this, but I'm going to quote Margaret Wente in this morning's Globe. "Despite the rantings of the progressive Conservative leader of the opposition, there's nothing so far to link the Premier to the gas plant scandal. Even my Conservative friends think the leader of the opposition is bad news. He comes across as a small-town bully. His political misjudgments just keep piling up. His attacks on the Premier over the gas plant scandal are both shrill and unnecessary, Mr. Speaker." I think Margaret Wente speaks for herself.
Thank you.